Well, good evening. It's good to see each and every one of you. If you will, open your New Testaments to Matthew chapter 15, and we'll begin there in a minute at verse 21. Appreciate the song leaders today. I was telling Todd this morning, he led 3 songs I have never sung before. And I love to hear Todd lead singing. I've been in meetings over at Greenwood when he has led the singing there and other places as well. So it's always a delight to have him. Though I think Austin outdid him tonight when he led that song, "The Storm Till the Storm Passes," and it thundered just at the right time. Oh, you always wish for that, in the minute that, you read a passage that says God spoke from heaven, and the thunder would happen just at the right moment, Anyway, appreciate your song leaders. Appreciate all of you and your encouragement and the things you said this morning, and I hope the lessons will be beneficial to you. I want to look with you tonight in a passage about a woman that was severely tested and how God dealt with her, how God's Son Jesus dealt with her. And it is a remarkable story. So begin reading with me, if you will, at verse 21 of Matthew 15. "And Jesus went away from there and withdrew to the district of Tyre and Sidon. And behold, a Canaanite woman from that region came out and was crying, 'Have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David. My daughter is severely oppressed by a demon.' But he did not answer her a word. And his disciples came and begged him, saying, 'Send her away, for she is crying out after us.' And he answered, 'I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel.' But she came and knelt before him, saying, 'Lord, help me.' And he answered, 'It is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs.' She said, 'Yes, Lord, yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table.' Then Jesus answered her, 'O woman, great is your faith. Be it done for you as you desire.' And her daughter was healed instantly." So the English Standard records it. What a tremendous passage. What a peculiar passage when you think about how Jesus dealt with this woman. It is the only occasion on which Jesus was outside of Jewish territory, at least that we have recorded. I think it foreshadows, obviously, that the gospel would first go to the Israelites, go to the household of Israel, but that it was meant to go to all the world. It begins, in effect, to end the barriers of all that will come to God. And, of course, that is almost everyone in this audience, unless you have some Jewish descent. We all belong to Gentile nation. This woman is not just any Gentile. I want you to note at verse 22. Yours may say Syrophoenician. Understand Syrophoenician, Canaanite. This woman is from the Old Testament Canaanites. Remember that they were not all destroyed as God said they were supposed to. Israel was supposed to wipe all of them out. In this form in the New Testament, it only appears here and in 2 usages in Acts the 7th chapter when Stephen is recounting the story of the Old Testament. This woman descended from those very people, the people that God said the land will vomit them out. That graphic terminology to depict that they would be cast out of the promised land and they were to be annihilated because of their sins, the judicial judgment that God had passed upon them. And His people were to totally remain separate from them. She descends from people that we know in the archaeological record buried babies alive in urns and set them into the city gates when they would set the gate of a city. And they would offer these babies to their gods. They would roll them down. Remember, God said not to offer your sons and daughters to make them pass through the fire to the god Molech, a god that was shaped something like a Buddha, and they would roll babies down the arms into a pit of fire. That sometimes you read about the king of Moab burning his son on the city walls, and that all of the ungodliness that took place at the high places where they would engage in all kinds of illicit sexual practices, both with men and women, in order to somehow bring fertility to the land. That is how that God would bless, the gods would bless their land. And on we could go with how despicable they were and how horrible life must have been. One of the prophets spoke on one occasion of both a father and a son going into the same woman. Can you imagine how despicable the Canaanites were? And what I'm trying to paint for you is this woman descends from those kinds of people. And yet she knew something very special about Jesus. She called him Lord, Son of David. She knows the Old Testament. She knows the promise, apparently, of a Messiah to come from David. She knows of that great promise made to King David that one would come someday to sit on his throne. And she references that. And so she comes to him at verse 22 begging for a daughter that is severely oppressed with a demon. Demons are something that almost just comes on the scene in humongous way in the New Testament. You don't really see any of it in the Old Testament or in the period that comes before this in the silent years. And then even after the book of Acts and into the tail end of the first century, by the second century, there's no mention almost of any kind of miracle. It's as if God allowed Satan to be unleashed at the same time that His Son would come on this earth. And that people were severely at times, many demons were cast out by Him. Kenny Chumley says in his commentary on this that she was badly, he translates it, badly demonized, suffering horrors, the other phrase he translates. So the woman cries out to him. The Greek has an imperfect tense that we do not have, past, present, and future, but they had what they called imperfect, meaning that at the point she started crying to him, she kept on crying to him. That's why it appears to us that the disciples said, send her away. I mean, just go ahead and do what she's asking for. And get her out of here. Because she just kept on pleading, not just one plea to Jesus. She kept on persisting in her plea. I'll tell you, true faith many times can be found where you least expect it. Rahab the harlot, Naaman the leper, the church at Corinth. And as J.C. Ryle said in his commentary, it is grace and not place which makes people believers. And so tonight I want to share with you, I think, three very vital things. You know, every good sermon has 3 points. How vital to persevere in prayer. I want you to know the first thing that it says about her asking Jesus to do this. Jesus just simply ignores her. He answered her not a word. Can you imagine a more ultimate insult? You ever had somebody do that to you if you were really pressing your point and they just ignore you? Do you remember when they brought that woman into Jesus and it says literally they threw her down in His midst? They said, we caught this woman in adultery. The law in the very act. The law of Moses says stone her to death. What do you say? You know what the text says he did? He just stooped down and wrote with his finger on the ground. And then the text says that they pressed him more. They kept on asking him. What do you think the tone of that was? When he ignored them and started writing on the ground, and then they kept asking him, I just asked you a question. The law says stone her. What do you say? Can you imagine how they were punching him, at least with words, and trying to get him to answer? And he just ignored them finally to the point that he lifted up and said, he that is without sin among you, let him cast the first stone. And the text says that one by one, from the oldest to the youngest, they went out from his presence. Secondly, the text says here that Jesus excludes her. He just simply says, I don't owe you anything, woman. I was sent only to the household of Israel. You, lady, are a Gentile, and therefore you have no claim on my care or my time or my power. You want to talk about now adding insult to injury. Period. End of the story. You have no right, legitimate right to be heard by me. And yet the woman does not walk away from Jesus. In fact, in effect, I believe she is worshiping Him. She kneels down before Him. Now, I realize that may not necessarily mean this, but I believe because of what she has called Him already, Jesus, Son of David, she kneels before Jesus and again in pleading voice says, Lord, help me. I want to tell you, Hobbes wrote of this, one would think this would have broken Jesus' heart. That he would have reached out to this woman whose daughter is so severely... I mean, every time I watch St. Jude's, all they have to do is run St. Jude's commercial and I go get my checkbook, and think about sending them that $19 every month just to help those little kids. Known little kids in my life that have gone to St. Jude's, or in my area of the country, the M.D. Anderson and the Texas Children's Hospital, and know all the horrors that they go through. How could somebody like Jesus, that is the most compassionate, merciful person, because He is the Son of God in the flesh, that He could do this, treat her in this way? It is an astounding action of Jesus. And then, as I said to you, if He added insult to injury, now He just says, "You're a dog." Can you imagine somebody saying something like that to us? My dad used to tell me, I've told this story before. There used to be a tobacco called Bull Durham. Some of you that are young don't even know what that is. But I told this story, and a lady brought me one time, a congregation, little gold bulls. She said they used to appear in those tobacco sacks that Bull Durham tobacco was in. My dad told the story to me that when he was in school, if somebody called him Bull Durham, that was fighting words. Those were fighting words. That was an insult. Can you imagine whatever word you want to pick? In my area of the country, it's the tea sippers. It's University of Texas. It's any word that you want to pick that would be the ultimate insult. Can you imagine that that's what he is saying to her? And by implication, he's saying the children of Israel are the little children that are at the table. It's not fit, he said, to take the children's bread, verse 28, and throw it to the dogs. Now, folks, we need to remember that dogs in this time were not generally, and for sure in most households, they weren't a family pet. They were the scavengers on the edge of town. They were the ones that came and licked Lazarus' sores when he was laid at the gate of the rich man. Do you remember that when they put Jezebel's body out, dropped it from the roof, that when they said Jehu said she's a princess, go and bury her, and they go out and the dogs had eaten her up so that nothing but her hands and her head was left. This is not the household family pet of Westerners. So he's saying, in effect, you are below and beneath anything that anybody ought to care about. Sometimes some commentaries will say something like, well, Jesus was maybe being playful with this woman. Like sometimes we may look at a friend and say, well, you rascal. I'm going to tell you, that just destroys, I think, what this text is trying to say to us. The likelihood here is that he means it as harshly as it is meant to come across to us. And so, as Tack Chumley says in his commentary, by ignoring, excluding, and insulting this desperate mother, Christ never seemed more un-Christ-like. You are a dog to me. But she does not give up. She accepts what he has just said, and answers him back, yes, Lord. But even the dogs, now thinking of maybe household pets that would have existed to some degree, eat of the crumbs that fall from the master's table. And at that, Jesus says, great is your faith, woman, let it be to you as you have asked. How likely would I have gone this far with him? How likely would it be that you would go that far with God if God dealt with us in that manner? I'll tell you, God is looking for people who are looking for Him. And sometimes He does not make it easy, maybe more often than not, for us to find Him. I know in one way the Scripture speaks, He's not far from us. But I want you to think about another aspect of that. The Apostle Paul wrote in 2 Corinthians 4 and verse 8, we are afflicted in every way but not crushed. You think of Paul that talks about he was beaten with rods 3 times with the stripes that were 40 minus 1. He was in shipwreck, he was in danger and peril of his own countrymen, of robbers and thieves, and he goes through all of the litany of being imprisoned and being in shipwrecks and all of those different things. We are afflicted in every way, he says, but we're not crushed. It's almost like thinking of the olives that are being pressed, and yet we are not totally undone. Listen to this phrase, the next one. Perplexed, but not driven to despair. building on what I said this morning about what I've had to say to my son about what's happened to him. And maybe is your case when you have lost your job or you have lost a family member that is so precious to you. Your spouse has died. At home where I am, a deacon, 47 years old, suffered a stroke. He was dead within 4 months after just terrible ordeal. And he's left a boy who just started college and 2 more that are down in high school and middle school, and a widow who's just 45 years old. One of our elders' wives died and she was 52 of a brain tumor. All this has happened in the congregation where I am in just the past year. But you could tell me the same thing here. And when we lose job and family and spouse, and sometimes when they go from us in such horrible ways as cancer, when brethren have mistreated us, and all other kinds of things that we could raise. Listen to the Apostle Paul. When we deal with God, we are going to be perplexed many times. But listen to him also. But we're not driven to despair. Then verse 9 he says, persecuted but not forsaken, struck down but not destroyed. Even if death came to us, it is not the end of us. How long would I have dealt with Jesus? Until I said, I've had it with you. If this is the way you are and this is the way you treat your people, then I don't want any more to do with you. You're going to call me a dog. That's just the final straw. It's a book that I read a number of years ago, written by Elie Wiesel, titled Night. Maybe you have read it before. He was a survivor of Auschwitz, one of the terrible concentration camps of the Nazis where they intended to eliminate all Jews and other unworthy people that they deemed gypsies and people that have, if you have somebody in your family that is physically deformed, they were eliminating all of those people. There was a boy who had stolen food to help to himself survive and maybe family members, because Elie Wiesel was there. When he got off the train, his mother and sister were separated and taken away, and it was the last time he ever laid eyes upon them. They perished in that fire of Auschwitz. His father died also. He is the only of his family that survived. He told the story of this boy that had stolen, a 12-year-old boy, 10 or 12-year-old boy, had stolen food, and that the Nazis caught him, and the guards hung him, assembled everybody out in the courtyard, and they hung him, and it took him 30 minutes to die. And then the voice came from behind him in the crowd. Where is God? Where is He now? And so his struggle in that book of losing his faith in God and coming back to his faith in God. I'll tell you folks, if you haven't been stricken to where you question God, I'm just going to tell you, you haven't been stricken. If there's not a point where you have to wrestle with what Paul said, that you have to say those words, we are persecuted, we are struck down, we are perplexed, and all the dangers and horrors that come along with that in our faith, and we simply haven't yet experienced what this lady experienced. Why does the Scripture have to say to us in Galatians 6 and verse 9, and let us not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up? Why does the Scripture have to say things like that to us unless it is very likely that we will give up? That it's very likely that we can grow discouraged and so weary that we just flat don't want any more to deal with that kind of God. I know people in my family who have become bitter, who once were joyful and happy people, but who have become embittered by what life has done to them. And their faith in God is almost gone. Or are we like Elijah when the terrible test comes, we just run away. Let's just escape. Some people do into alcohol and drugs in the world to get away from the pain. Some people escape from everybody, just isolate themselves, remove themselves. And so Elijah runs from the length of Mount Carmel and the top of the land almost to the southern border, and there God's angel meets him, and he's sleeping and gives him food, so that in the power of that food he was able to go to Mount Horeb, Mount Sinai. So he runs another several hundred miles to get there. And then he's in that cave, and you know that God came in a great wind, a mighty wind, and then probably lightning is what the fire describes, and a great earthquake, and the mountain, that granite mountain is just tore, some pieces of it is tore off of it. And he comes out wrapping his mantle on his face to the edge of the cave, and in the opening, and a still small voice comes, silence. What are you doing here, Elijah? Twice. And his answer is, I, even I, only am left, and they seek my life. You know, the problem with Elijah, as we've often pointed out, is that he was in the business of counting who was faithful to God, and that's only God's business. God said, you don't know that I have 7,000 knees. Probably because of the work Elijah had done. 7,000 knees that have not bowed to Baal. Get up, Elijah. Go back and anoint Jehu as king over Israel. Anoint Hadad as king over Syria. And anoint Elisha as prophet in your place. Does God say to him, oh, Elijah, I know how much you have suffered and I'm so sorry for it? No, he just kicks him in the seat of the pants. Or robe as it is. And says, get about the work that I gave you. The greatest tool in Satan's arsenal, I believe, not is to get us to commit some great sin, violate the covenant that we have with our wife or husband, all these things that sometimes we do see. The greatest number of people that have fallen away from God have fallen away out of sheer discouragement. That Satan knows if I hammer on them again and again and again, and I whittle on them, and I turn people against them, I can wear them out. And he has done a great job of it. Have you ever been there? How vital to persevere in prayer. To persist in it and never give up. To hang on to God. Secondly, this story teaches us that if we will seek God, we must diligently do so to find Him. How badly do we want God? You probably have here, just like I do at home, folks that only come on Sunday morning. I'm going to tell you right now, if those kind of folks, and I pray they'll listen to this at some point on the CD, or maybe they'll hear it in some other way, but I'm going to tell you right now, those folks are not seeking God with all their heart and soul and mind. Now, it's not saying to us that we have to meet twice a day. It's not saying we have to meet on Wednesday night either, is it? But we set those things in place because we are trying to say to one another, there is something vital that we better turn our hearts and focus on. And to seek Him is not just coming and attending a service, I understand, but it's seeking Him and understanding that those are just kind of the minimal things of what it means to seek Him with all of our heart and our soul and our mind. How badly do we want God? How badly did this woman want Jesus? And I am in the things that you look at in the New Testament and the Old Testament is that when the night is the darkest, it almost is only then does God come. Not always, but almost. There's a passage in Mark that says He had told them to go across the Galilee, and He looked out and saw that they were rowing hard against the wind. They were not making much progress. These are guys, Peter, James, John, Andrew, they know the Sea of Galilee. They know how to do what they are doing. So he saw that they were making headway painfully, for the wind was against them. And about the fourth watch of the night, in about 3 a.m, he comes to them, walking on the water. And then this curious phrase, and he meant to pass them by. And yet they cry out, thinking they have seen a ghost, and only then does he turn and come to them. That is the strangest passage to me, that he came to walk on the water. He had sent them out there, and he sees that they are struggling, and he walks out toward where they are, where they can see him, and he meant to walk by them. And head where? To the other side. It makes me think of the passage in the Old Testament that tells the story of Jacob when he had come to his wits' end, knowing that Esau is coming with 400 armed men. And the last thing he remembers Esau saying 20 years before that is what? When my dad dies, I'm going to kill him. He stole my birthright, I'm going to kill him. And so now he hears that Esau is coming with 400 armed men. What do you think he thinks is going to happen? So he separates his people into 2 camps, thinking if he attacks one, the other can escape. And the camp that has his most beloved wife and Joseph, he sets the handmaids in the front with their children, then Leah with her children, and finally with Rachel and Joseph at the back. And he sends servants out with huge chunks of flocks, sheep and goats and cattle and donkeys. And he sends them out, and he said, put a great space between you. And when Esau comes to the first one, he says, well, what's the meaning of this? And he said, these are a gift from your servant Jacob to my lord Esau. He was trying to soften him up, isn't he? And then each one he would come to, there's more animals to give to him. And then it says he went down into the deep Jabbok, crossed over a deep crevice, ravine, and got on the other side, and there waited the night. And then the text says, and Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of day. Imagine in the middle of the night that you sat down to what? To pray to God, to watch for what is coming, to do everything you can to protect those that you love that are yours, to plan maybe more. And in the middle of the night you're attacked out of the black by a man who wrestles with you, and you think, what is he? Do you think they were wrestling like you wrestle with your brother? Or for life and death? And when the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he changes the whole contest in a moment. He touched the socket of his hip, and Jacob's hip went out of joint immediately as he wrestled with him. And then he said, listen to it, he just touched his hip and threw it out of joint with a touch. Let me go. But the day has broken. And Jacob said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. He knew this was no man. He said to him, what is your name? He said, Jacob. He said, your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel. For you have striven with God and with men to strive with God, Israel, and have prevailed. And so think of this woman who in her great faith would not let go of Jesus. It didn't matter how she was treated by him. It didn't matter what he didn't do and what he said to her. She would not let go of God. So how badly do you want God? How badly do I want God? There's a psalmist that writes to us in 119:71, it is good for me that I was afflicted that I might learn your statutes. It's almost as if we do not learn what we must learn to become like Him unless we suffer. Unless we suffer. Without affliction, as J.C. Ryle says, she might have lived and died in careless ignorance and never seen Jesus at all. Finally, the script has not been written in stone. Marvel that we can change the mind of God. Marvel that we can pray to God. And that we see those time and again in the Old Testament where people prayed to God who had said, I'm going to do this. But because they prayed to God fervently and fervently, He changed His mind. He changed His mind because they prayed to Him. Marvel that He can listen to us and care so much, and that He was greatly moved by great faith. This text says, Jesus answered her, O woman, great is your faith. Be it done to you as you desire. Other texts sometimes say it this way to us. The Roman centurion that said, you don't have to come to my house. I'm a man of authority. I speak and they go do what I tell them to do. Soldier or servant, just speak the word. I'm not worthy for you to come in my house. And when Jesus heard this, it says He marveled and said to those who followed Him, truly I tell you, with no one in Israel have I found such faith. Calvinism in its purest form says that all things have been determined by God. It just can't change. You are either determined to go to heaven or hell. Events that happen this day have been preordained by God. Pure Calvinism would say that's exactly the way it is. And yet if that is so, how in the name of common sense and honesty could Jesus marvel at anything? Unless God can be astounded by us. That we can rise to a level of faith that He rarely sees. And He marvels at it. And He reaches out to help. If all is written in stone, how could God marvel? And so I close this lesson to make us think about this quote. Let us mark this well. There's nothing which shows our ignorance so much as our impatience under trouble. Trials are intended to make us think, to wean us from the world, to send us to the Bible, to drive us to our knees. Anything is better than living in carelessness and dying in sin. That suffering has its point in this world. Beware of the preacher that says that's the last point. James 5:11. There's this wonderful statement made by James where he says, Behold, we consider those blessed who remain steadfast. You have heard of the steadfastness of Job. You have seen the purpose of the Lord, how the Lord is compassionate and merciful. All that Job endured. The Bible says, if you use the New King James, it says intended. The end intended by the Lord. The purpose of the Lord. There was something yet in His great mind to give to Job. All his children were killed. But in the end, he lost none of them. Did he? If they were faithful, he lost none of them. And God gave him 10 more. And God blessed him beyond all that he had ever had before that. God took him through a firestorm for sure, but in the end, He was merciful and compassionate, and that is the end that God intends for all of us. When the Confederates had to retreat from Sherman taking Atlanta, and as they retreated in October of 1864, Joseph Johnson sent John Bell Hood, who in turn sent Brigadier General John McCorse to Allatoona Pass, where the supply depot for the Federals was, to destroy it, and so help the ones that were escaping. General McCorse arrived with 3,000 men. The Samuel B. French, who came with the Union, arrived almost at the same time with only 2,000. I got the two commanders backward. French, the Confederate, gave Corse 5 minutes to unconditionally surrender and avoid, as he said, a needless effusion of blood. Corse shot back his terse reply, "We are prepared for the needless effusion of blood whenever it is agreeable to you." With that, the battle commenced. It was a savage engagement. Both sides lost heavily, but the Union lost 1/3 of its troops in a matter of minutes. 2 of the 3 redoubts fell to the Confederates, but Corse held firm the last one, being shot through the cheekbone and losing one ear that he carried as a scar the rest of his life. And he held fast because Sherman had signaled him that morning from the top of Kennesaw Mountain, "Hold fast, we are coming." There were 60,000 Federals from all different directions that Sherman had ordered to come to his aid. French withdrew at 4 in the afternoon, having never gained his objective. A song would be written that almost is not sung anymore, "Hold the Fort." It may be that's what he said. I like better the idea, "Hold fast, we are coming." For almost the ending words of the Bible are, "I am coming. I am coming. Hold fast." There's nothing that can take us away from God except us. If we give up. If you're subject to heaven's invitation this night, Jesus said, "He that believes and is baptized shall be saved. He that believes not shall be condemned." Or if you need to come back to Him and confess in any way, we bid you come. If you need to ask for prayers, that you may be strengthened. All together we stand and sing.